unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J.N. Elias.
We have an unidentified flying
object. Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J, and co-hosting with me live in London is my good friend Johnny Webb, where it's actually 3 a.m. in London, GMT. I think it's Greenwich Mean Time. Real quick, before we bring in our all-star guest, I got 3 pieces of UFO news I'd like to share with you, courtesy of you, the listeners. The first one, this is out of the UK, of course, because this is an international show, and you've all heard international questions. This one is a UFO flurry over UK town, and the town is Hungerford, and this came out of the express.co.uk. And this is a rare one. This is also from the Express in the UK. It's about John Lennon, and the question is, was John Lennon's UFO sighting recorded in a rare drawing by the Beatles frontman? Now that is a fascinating article. If you all remember when Grant Cameron was on, he gave a nice, amazing lecture about the musicians that were influenced by UFOs or extraterrestrials or other entities. As a matter of fact, if all of you have heard my interview with Jack Osbourne, you can hear the influence that Ozzy Osbourne himself had. And if you haven't heard it, all you have to do is just Google Jack Osbourne UFOs and you'll find it on YouTube. Final piece of UFO news, and this came from Open Minds, Alejandro Rojas. The UFO appears to morph shape moving from helicopter, and this is over St. George, Utah. Very interesting. I'd love to get all your comments on this because remember, we have so many new military technologies and planes that a lot of people are misidentifying as UFOs. That's probably one of the reasons we have so many. There's just so many different theories out there, and this is exactly why we do shows like this for you, the listeners, to get amazing information from all-star guests, such as the one I'm about to introduce, and that happens to be the one and only Jay Weidner. Mr. Weidner, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad you invited me.
You are truly been a hero. You've been on television multiple times. You've actually been an associate producer, if I'm not mistaken, for a series on the History Channel. You also did written a couple books. You did one a film, Nostradamus 2012, and then I think Time Wave 2013, and so many others. Everybody out there should know Mr. Weidner. We have so many different topics we can cover, but I figured the first thing that really struck my attention when I heard one of your interviews a while back was about the ARCHONS. And I was wondering if you could explain for all the listeners out there who don't know what the word ARCHON means, who they are, what they came here for, and why they left.
Well, there's the ARCHONS are interesting because they come from there's actually ancient texts, the Nag Hammadi texts, which talk about the ARCHONS, which is where the word comes from. And the Nag Hammadi were texts that were written on paper, leather, copper, scrolls, and then stuck into clay jars. And then a little shepherd boy found them in Egypt in 1945, and they were finally translated years later from their original text into English and German and all the rest. And what's interesting about it is that these texts have not been messed with. The church hasn't gotten a hold of them, or no politicians or popes, or no one has gotten hold of these texts. So it's actually a kind of a written dialogue from people 2,100 years ago without anyone touching the original text, which is very important to researchers like me. And what these texts say, which a lot of interesting things, but one of the most important things they talk about is that there's a group of off-planet entities which have entered into our sphere and can invade people, their personalities, and then feed off their energy. So the ARCHONS really get off on perverse sex and violence and stadium sports, I presume, and maybe like boxing and sadism. And what they do is they come in like moths to a flame, to these situations. And so then the kind of the post-Archon theory is that the Archons are in fact now creating these events so that there's a lot of violence and fear and terror so that they can feed off of them. They feed off of fear and terror of humans like it's food. And you know, the fact that these texts say this, and then we look at our world today, and you can almost see where this might have some truth to it, that there might be some beings who do this because of the absolute insanity that we see going on around us, as witness, say, for the South Carolina shooting. So, you know, I for one, think that the Archon theory has a lot of truth to it, and that we should look at it very deeply, because the ancients put this stuff in, you know, in these clay jars and buried it somewhere because they knew one day it would be found. And maybe it is, you know, beyond just a coincidence that they were found, especially in 1945, which is really kind of the year that, I don't know, where the world seemed to start changing into a vastly different place than it was before, as if an alien presence had begun to take over the world and change it into something that it was not before.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned the fact that they were feeding off of negative energy, because a lot of people state that. And as you know, fear is control. Obviously, there's some entities that feed off energy, but in general, just human nature, the more fear you have around you, the more you're less control you have. And that's why propaganda is so effective. It keep people scared, then essentially you can take away rights here and there. Now, the fact that other beings are actually feeding off it as food, that's a theory that I've heard several times, and it's probably been going around for thousands of years. I really like the fact that you mentioned that these ancients left these in clay tablets for us to be found as sort of time capsules to remind us down the future, if had anything happened to them, what was going on then. What else have you been able to uncover along the lines of time capsules in that form, where you were something was found by the ancients, or dug by the ancients in a hole for us to find in the future, that revealed something about what's happening now?
Well, there's a lot, actually. But before I go on to that, I would like to talk about, you know, the people that left those clay tablets or those clay jars there with the writings in them, and other people of their same ilk. These were people that in the days then, 2,000 years ago, were called Gnostics, and every one of the Gnostic groups that lived, and Gnostic means knowledge, every one of those groups was really murdered and genocided off the face of the earth. And so you have to wonder if what they're talking about, the Archons, doesn't have, you know, some kind of truth to it, because, you know, generally those who are victimized are speaking the truth in a lot of ways. But getting back to your idea of other groups leaving behind knowledge, I think there's many, and I think that not just the pyramids. We don't really know exactly what was on the pyramids because the facing stones have been taken off, but you know, just the fact that the power of the shape of the pyramids and how they were built, or because we really don't understand how they were built, and a lot of other things, the Cross of Henday, which I've written about, and a lot of the cathedrals in Europe, a lot of these things, Stonehenge, are really, and even Washington, D.C., which, you know, is proof that there was a group, you know, less than 200 years ago operating inside the United States who understood these deep esoteric secrets about not just catastrophe, but cycles of time and a lot of other things, you know, very advanced esoteric and exoteric knowledge. It is buried in the Capitol, the streets, the layouts, and everything. It's incredibly fascinating to know that the people who founded this country were so advanced in.
And even more so during that time wasn't Washington D.C. actually built in the shape or in, I guess the shapes of the Masonic images or ritual or what's on garbs?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt. It's so deep and so heady that you have no other choice but to say that, you know, the people that built Washington D.C., who were the founders of our country and funded Washington, the building of the city, were understood knowledge of such an advanced nature that it's astounding. And if you do a close examination of all of the monuments on Earth, and then you kind of add up the points that not only they have in common, but the advanced principles that they're teaching, it would be the pyramids at Giza would be number one, and we don't know if they were built by Masons, but the Masons claim that they were involved in the building of the pyramids. I kind of highly doubt that claim. But then the next thing would be Stonehenge, which is incredibly advanced knowledge of astronomy and astrology. And then actually I think the Cross of Henday, which is what I've written about in two of my books, which is a small monument in the south of France, which explains deep esoteric principles in the most simplistic way, which of course means that the learner must go out and find information in a kind of almost ingenious way to initiate themselves. And then finally Washington, D.C., which has the most amazing amount of stuff in it, in the most incredible sacred geometry, that you have to say that they're, at least up into where Washington, D.C. was created, there's been a secret society which has incredibly advanced information.
Johnny Webb's got a question in the UK. Go ahead, Johnny.
Good evening, Jay. My question on the same subject was the mysteries of Mount Shasta and the Brotherhood of Satan. Could you tell us some more about that?
Yeah, the Mount Shasta, which, really wasn't really even known to European culture until like 1850 and later than that. But to the Native American culture, it was a huge sacred mountain. Of course, it's a mountain in northern California, right on the border with Oregon, and it's a extant volcano, we hope, and there's all this lore ever since the Indians told the white people when they started moving on Mount Shasta, that there were all these beings that lived up there, and to watch out for them, in fact. And, the Europeans didn't understand what they were talking about, and they moved there, and then all these strange happenstances began, strange lights dancing up on the mountain, and odd people walking around in town, and finally a guy in a nearby town wrote a book about a Tibetan who claimed that he went through a tunnel system from Tibet to Mount Shasta, a human, or maybe not human, built tunnel system. And then, just there's so much stuff about it that it just, finally I was so into the lore of it. I was living nearby in Southern Oregon at the time that, I decided to make a feature film about it called The Last Avatar, which is coming out here in the next few months. And, it's gotten pretty good reviews. New Dawn magazine in Australia has given it a rave review. And we're getting... it's very difficult to release a film in this environment, but it's all about what you're asking about the mysteries of Mount Shasta and how they mix in with world cultures and ancient catastrophes, and the ARCHONS are in it, and everything.
Mount Shasta, of course, is a very sacred place, as you mentioned. So is Stonehenge. Of course, any place where the pyramids are located. Obviously, the civilizations chose, or whichever civilization, whoever it was that built them, chose them to be there for a particular reason. Some people speculate that it was ley lines, But it seems to me that every single one of these areas has this extra features of maybe possible wormholes, stargates, whatever you want to call it, something that's interacting with possibly another dimension or whatever you may call it. But are you getting the same feeling that there's something sacred with individual areas, or does it have to do with ley lines? What's your take on that particular instance?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that I think the whole thing is electromagnetic. And so, like, if you're in underneath Mount Shasta, which I've been, you will have these lava tubes. And they're these huge in some cases. In fact, most cases, they're huge. You're dwarfed by them. They're, 60, 70 feet in diameter. And you're walking through them, and you realize that, a lava tube is a lava has gone down this tube and then cooled, and then as it cooled, it contracts into the wall and creates this opening. So the walls of a lava tube are these highly mineral-enriched, that have been previously heated, piezoelectric generators, and that in the circular shape of the lava tubes, and I'm not getting this, making this up. Nassim Haramein, the alternative physicist, has stated everything I'm telling you in public. So it's not just me; it's other people, and that these create electromagnetic field, and we know that Tesla was doing an experiment, and he got zapped by a 3.5 million volt, a jolt of electricity coming off of one of his Tesla coils, and fortunately his assistant, turned it off after 2 seconds. But we know from that, what he told people was that in those 2 seconds, he experienced the past, the future, and the present all at the same moment. And so what I'm saying is that accidental experiment was the beginning of the Stargate technology, in which they began to understand that high degrees of voltage will create a field which transcends the fourth dimension of time. And then, and this is, then we can move on to gravitics, electrogravitics, and, saucer technology and all that, because that's the same technology that's creating the Stargates is creating the powered up flying saucers, the UFOs. Are using electrogravitics to power themselves up, and this stuff, should all be released, but it will never be released. It's too bad, because if technology ever was released to us, Joe Sixpacks and Joan Chardonnays, we would, from then on, be released from paying high electrical bills, and we could probably Stargate ourselves up to the Himalayas and maybe even out into the solar system, who knows, all for free, because we shouldn't be paying for any of it. You should be able to grow food in the Sahara Desert and all the rest, because the technologies exist, but they're holding them from us, and the imminent release of that technology does not seem to be on the horizon.
I'm glad you brought up Nassim Haramein. He was actually on the show talking about the free energy Nassim last month. And actually last week, William Brown, who also works with him at the Resonance Project, was also talking about. So this information is finally getting out there. If it wasn't for alternative news outlets such as this, if it was just the 5 mainstream networks, then we would literally be still censored. And that's why I think we're really progressing to a new stage of awareness. Now, going back to the electricity, do you believe that the ancient civilizations had access to it? Because some people speculate they did. For instance, one example was given was the Baghdad battery.
Oh, yeah, I think they had access to it. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And, there's more. There's the tombs in Egypt that had the eternal light that burned out after we opened up the gates or the door. And it was all over the place. So electricity and these things are not. They're not that difficult to understand once you understand, torsion fields and higher dimensional physics. And they did. I mean, we're the stupid ones, not the ancients. They understood all this. They just had a different way of doing it. They had what you might call shape technology, which uses vibration and resonance rather than hard force like we do with like hydroelectric dams and nuclear power and all of that. They had a completely different way of powering up, much safer, less obtrusive, and less damaging to nature.
You've alluded, like in your books, about Stanley Kubrick possibly faking the moon landings. Could you give us a bit more information on that and how you came to sort of surmise that?
Well, I'm probably one of the few individuals who both understood the life of Stanley Kubrick to a large degree and the things that he accomplished in his life, while I was also involved in looking at the Apollo program, examining it as a researcher, not examining it because it was fake, examining it because certain individuals out in the world were claiming that what was really up on the moon were these gigantic alien glass cities that were 20 miles up in the air that no one could see, except that they showed up in the photographs if you managed to move the gamma or you put it, into a digital program and then like Photoshop, and then, you move the gamma around and the contrast around, you'd start seeing these weird images that were up above the ground in the moon. And of course, I'm talking about Richard Hoagland's work. And, and I was working and trying to figure out why Hoagland kept finding these pictures and why NASA would just deny it and say they weren't there, when it was clearly obvious that, in fact, once you jiggled the images, you could find these odd images, geometries, I'll call them. That's what Hoagland would call them. And then sometimes Hoagland would find rainbow little lights in the sky above one of the astronauts, say Ed Mitchell on Apollo 14. And then, what was this odd thing? And then Hoagland again would say, well, that's a refraction of the glass city that's high up around the astronauts. So, I had to ask myself, okay, Occam's razor, do I believe that there's 20-mile above-the-ground glass cities built by aliens that are still on the moon that cannot be seen unless they're taken by photographs in which you move the gamma and the contrast around? And my heart said, no, probably not. Something not right here. So that began my quest into what this was. And then one night, years after I began this quest to figure out what Hoagland was actually finding in these odd photographs, which he definitely was, they were there. He wasn't, putting them on, Photoshop and making them up. I got the NASA originals and did the same work he did. I know photographs. I know how to do things. Anyway, so one night I clicked on my new DVD. This is 2001. They released the 2001 A Space Odyssey on DVD in 2001, and I got it and I put it on to watch it because I'm a huge Stanley Kubrick fan. And I started watching the ape scenes at the beginning of the film, and I began to realize that I had inadvertently discovered what Hoagland was seeing. And what I found, and I quickly took the DVD and I put it onto Final Cut and Photoshop, and began removing taking the gamma and increasing it and increasing the contrast, exactly what Hoagland was doing. And I discovered that the ape scenes, which I knew were shot in a cinema process called front screen projection, had the same geometries around them that Hoagland's photographs of Apollo moon landings had around them. And I investigated further, and I realized that there's always a stage screen line between the actors and the up front set in front screen projection, and then the projected image in the background, which is usually a still. And that I began to compare the Apollo photographs to the photographs of the ape scenes at the beginning of 2001, and began to realize that the entire Apollo photographs were actually front screen projection, and that I could find that telltale geometry in the sky around the astronauts just like I could find it in the sky around the apes in 2001, because what we were really looking at is the screen, the front projection screen sitting behind the ape in 2001 or the astronaut in the Apollo programs. And what the screen was is these 3M created a process called with the front screen projection, where they took millions of little tiny glass beads and they sewed together gigantic screens for Stanley on 2001. And what you're seeing is the seams of all these screens sewn together and creating these odd geometries. And you can see them on both 2001 and you can see them in Apollo, and they're almost exactly the same. And it's not just that, though. It's the line between the stage and the screen that's near the bottom, of the image, is always changes texture. There's a line, either in 2001 or on the Apollo photographs. And if you look at that line, and I show it in my film Kubrick's Odyssey 1, if you look at it, you will see that there's always a change in texture between this line, which is always in every photograph. And the reason there's a change in texture is because the line is the change between the actual physical stage that the astronaut or the ape is on and the projected background. Now, you may say that I'm crazy, but there's a scientist out of the Ukraine in Kharkov University, Oleg, we're going to forget his name now, forgive me, Oleg, who did what they call parallax research on the Apollo photographs. And what he did was he took two photographs from the Apollo program that were taken very close to each other but slightly apart. So he took hundreds of photographs on the Apollo program, and he found two photographs that were slightly taken apart. And the reason he did that was he's going to create what they call parallax or perspective. It's how they make 3D movies. They have two cameras which are slightly apart from each other, offset from each other, and then they shoot the movie, and then they put the two images together, and then they give you those glasses which blend the images together so that you can see them, and you get parallax or 3D. Well, he did the same thing with these Apollo photographs. He put two photographs together. He did it several times. And what you can do with parallax is you can measure the distance, the true distance that an object is away from you. Scientists, astronomers use it all the time for measuring the distance of stars and planets. They take a reading on March 21st of, say, Sirius, and then the star Sirius, and then they take another reading on September 21st, and they're on the other side of the sun, and then they have parallax. They have two offset images of the star system, Sirius, and then they can tell you, it's 8.7 light years away. And so the same thing is true with these images that Oleg is using. He's offsetting these images and then looking to see how far away the mountains are from the astronauts. And he's proving, through moon maps that, the Apennine Mountains in Apollo 15 or 16 should be, 20 kilometers behind the astronauts. He does the parallax experiments, and voila, the mountains are 200 meters behind, which is impossible. And he does this over and over, proving that there's some kind of screen behind the astronauts. It's irrefutable evidence, and and I think NASA knows it, and they're running.
In England in about 1977, a British TV show called Science Today made a documentary called Alternative 4, and it basically showed a mission to Mars and a mission to the moon, and where they went inside some sort of structure on the moon, and then they found some sort of Indian woman alien and brought her inside this sort of Apollo lunar module. And I wonder if you've seen this footage and whether there's any relevance to this to the moon and the moon landings.
Well, I don't know if it has relevance to the moon landings, but yes, I've seen it, and it has relevance to a lot of things. And I think it's a very odd thing. It was not a low-budget film at all. It was fairly big budgeted. It had fairly well-known actors. They did not announce that it was a fraud and a fake and a goof-off. They played it as if it was real. They scared the living daylights out of all the Britons that saw it. And it was called Alternative 3, by the way. And you know, and it basically posited that that they were kidnapping scholars and slaves and taking them to Mars, and playing this off as if it's a real science documentary with missing persons and scary music and rather frightening affair. And the whole thing was posited on this idea that the whole world, it was 1977 now, that the whole world was going to come to an end, the greenhouse effect was going to burn up the whole entire world, and that everybody had to move off planet. And what everybody had to do was there was three alternatives. The first alternative was, I can't remember now, it was, to blow holes, believe it or not, in the upper atmosphere with nuclear weapons to let the greenhouse gases that were gathering, the CO2, escape into space, if you can believe that. Now, that sounds ludicrous, but to us, to blast nuclear weapons up into the upper atmosphere to let CO2 out. But unbeknownst to most of the world in 1977, the United States actually did that, did shoot nuclear weapons up into the atmosphere, hoping for the CO2 gases to escape into space. It failed miserably, but they still did it. And you got to wonder, whoever wrote Alternative 3 back in 1977, how they knew about all this. It was somewhat known, but it wasn't known to the general public in any kind of real way. Alternative 2 was that the elites, this telling you this show that showed in England in 1977 as a real science show, the elites would escape in Alternative 2 into underground bases where they would wait out this horrible nightmare that was coming. And again, 1977, almost nobody knew about the deep underground military bases and the tunnel systems that were being built at that time. So again, this show's got two pegs going for it right away. And then the third, Alternative 3, was kind of a, just screw it, we'll go off planet and move to Mars. And dang, if the chatter on the internet from insiders is they do seem to have gone somewhat to Mars.
I'm going to ask one quick thing, and then we have 4 written questions that came from listeners, and they're still coming, some going back to what you said earlier in the show.
Sure.
With regards, there's either people say that everything in what happened with Apollo was correct. We just ended our budget and stopped going, or there's the conspiracy. Within the conspiracy, there's either two. Either that we faked the moon landings, we never made it past the Van Allen belt, if I'm not mistaken, or the other one is that we went to the moon, we were forced by the living extraterrestrials on there to get off of there, saying that it's theirs, and the actual footage was staged, as you suggested. Do you think what we saw was staged, just like you mentioned from Stanley Kubrick, but that we actually went to the moon, or was it that we really never did in the first place?
No, we went to the moon. We went to the moon far earlier than 1969. And it wasn't we. I'm using the human race went to the moon. And we are much more advanced earlier than anyone presupposes. So, no, we were at the moon. Yes, I absolutely believe we went to the moon many times. That's not with rocketry.
Was the race on the moon the ARCHONS? That's a question I just got from you.
No, it was really a fake out. Yeah, I suppose at the very top, it must be maybe some of the Archons are twiddling the strings of the puppets. But I don't believe the Cold War was actually real. I think it was a fake, kind of a fake out between, the Soviet. There was a third group running both the Soviet Union and the United States, at least as far as the space programs are concerned. And they were each going after two different aspects of the space program that the elites had deemed necessary. So what had happened is that the Germans had discovered a lot of incredibly interesting things during the 30s and even earlier, and the 40s. And the United States and Russia inherited those discoveries, and a lot of that was on purpose. But a lot of what they inherited was also bogus stuff left behind that even if you back engineered it, you wouldn't be able to figure out what was going on. Brilliantly left behind by the Germans, so that the Americans and the Russians would spend a lot of needless time and energy back engineering stuff that was ridiculous. But they took the real stuff with them, and wherever they went, probably Antarctica.
I'm going to ask this first question from the Twitter feed, and then I'll go back to the other one. Lou, stand by. Don't worry, yours will be asked. This is from Eugene M. Rosa. Ask Mr. Weidner what he thinks of the flat Earth theory or enclosed system theory. Do you know about those?
Yes, I do. Well, I'm sorry to say I have researched the current blossoming of the flat Earth movement and its two leaders, and I can tell you that one of them actually admits that they were an employee of NASA and that they got the idea that the Earth was flat from some people within NASA. Now, why would NASA be having employees spreading around the idea that they're involved in some kind of cover-up of the Flat Earth Society? And I can tell you that the reason is because there is about to be released a whole, how do I say this in the right way? The people that operate the real space program, not the false space program, there's a lot of people being laid off and going out into society, and they're going to start whistleblowing on what's really going on, which is outrageous and amazing. And I want to let them let it out. I don't want to be the person that lets it out because I want the real people to let it out, but I know what they're going to come out with. I've heard it. That I believe that NASA is trying to get in front of this mind-blowing information, which would definitely confirm a round Earth beyond any shadow of a doubt. And by implanting many people into forums and into questions like you're asking, so that we either look like complete idiots, or the forums are flooded every time you begin talking about the secret space program and toroidal physics involving spinning round objects, which is necessary to free energy and life. Then you get flooded by these flat Earth fanatics who tell you that you're a NASA hustler because you're propounding the round Earth theory, when all you really have to do is either get yourself, $400 or $500 and a good GoPro, and buy yourself a space balloon and fill it up and hook the GoPro to it and let it go up to 100,000 feet and let it come down and get your GoPro, and then go look and see if the world changes as it goes up. Does the curve change? I've seen videos. It changes. All you have to do is get a boat, go to Chicago, get in a boat, start going north from Chicago on Lake Michigan. If it's a flat Earth, then that means that Lake Michigan is completely flat. Therefore, as far as you go on Lake Michigan, unless clouds and rain or something comes in between you, you should be able to see all of Chicago, no matter how far away you get, if the Earth was flat. But that's not what happens. What happens is that pretty soon the bottom of Chicago disappears, and then the first quarter of the skyscrapers disappear, and then the second half, and then the three quarters, and then pretty soon the top, and pretty soon you can't see it. In the flat Earth view, that could not happen. You should be able to see it all the way. Yet
I know. Sorry, I was going to say, but Goebbels, in the Second World War, he changed the law in Germany that taught all children that through a Black Sun project, I believe it was, but he said that the sun is in the center of our world, and basically we are living on a flat Earth. And then obviously when we changed over from the Second World War, and we had Project Paperclip and these other projects that came over to America, we are living in this time where the Nazis undercover are running America in the sense of the space program. But so it's a possibility that there is an off-world program.
There is an off-world program, and it's extremely advanced. And Joe Farrell has shown with the declassification in 1995 of all these documents from Germany that they were working on essentially electrogravitics and the Red Mercury project, and they were working really hard and fast on all sorts of exotic technology that had actually been developed much earlier, since the teens and the 20s, in private in projects by mostly German or German-American or American-German businessmen. So very interesting correlation between all these secret projects and wealthy Germans. And I keep finding it over and over again, and it really makes me wonder. And every time that one of these projects goes bright, it only goes bright for a little while, and this is all through the history, let's say the last 140 years or so, then it goes dark, and then you never hear of it again. And it's over and over and over. And, it's not just small fries that are inventing things that go dark. It's big people like Tesla.
I have a question going similar related to this, but going back, this was asked quite a while ago. It's from Richard Friedman in Sarasota, Florida. Mr. Weidner, can you please explain the influence of Wilhelm Reich on your work?
Wow. Thank you. Wilhelm Reich is one of my very favorite people. He was an Austrian, and he was a severely abused child, and he was also the protege of Freud, and he realized that Freud was right in the primary in thinking that sexuality was at the root of many of the human beings' psychological problems. But he began breaking with Freud when he realized that it was not just sex was not just a primal energy that encompasses the human being and drives them and this kind of primal view of sexuality that Freud had. Reich had this view that sexuality and the sex act, and also kind of the feeling that you get right before, during, but not while you're in an orgasm state, but right before, is a kind of an etheric energy being scooped in to your system, driven by kind of the friction of the sexual act, and that sex was actually this creator of an energy force, and he called it orgone. And this kind of, what's astonishing about this is this, calls into, into the tableau of ideas, the tantric ideas that a couple could have, how do I say this nicely, coitus interruptus, and for long periods of time they could stay in the sexual position, that this would generate this huge amount of force and energy around the couple, which could, cause them to, in fact, kind of almost create stargates and remote viewing and travel. And this is what the tantric texts from India are saying. And so Reich, he began perfecting this kind of view of this energy, the kind of toroidal, spinning energy that he thought was around everything, and doing tests, and then finally, proving it by, rain was part of the orgone energy. So he went down, did experiments in the 50s where he made, it rain in Tucson, Arizona, and where it hadn't rained in, decades. And, he brought in his orgone accumulators and stuck them all around, and did the same thing up in Maine during a drought. And then he was arrested, possibly for shooting down a UFO. He aimed his orgone accumulator at a UFO that was flying over his land in Tucson, and the thing crashed. And so that tells me that probably the UFO is running on the same toroidal energy, and somehow the orgone accumulator canceled it out. And he was arrested and thrown in prison, and he died. And then all of his books were burned, and you actually couldn't use the word orgone for years and years and years after this.
What year was this that it was shot down?
Huh?
What year was this that he shot it
down?
down?
55, 56, right before he was arrested.
Interesting.
A lot of people think there's a correlation between the shoot down and the arrest.
I'm wondering if it's related to the Kingman, Arizona crash, where maybe that was the reason why that crashed. Here's another listener question. This goes back, I don't even know if we touched this area. This is from Tom Anderson, Cincinnati, Ohio. Could Mr. Weidner relay any of Nostradamus' prophecies he sees clearly playing out now? I know this might carry over into our break, but if it does, we'll pick it up after.
Well, I mean, I think the most amazing thing about Nostradamus is that, and recently, is his famous quatrain where he says that. Of course, we were all worried about it because he actually predicted the date, which he never does, in which he says the King of Terror shall reign in the sky and war will come in September of 1999. And a lot of people in September of 99 were absolutely freaked out about the whole world because they thought something was kind of terror was going to come from the sky. And, nothing happened. And the world went on. But, like all things with Nostradamus, it's what's not on the surface that you have to look at. And I have to thank John Hogue, because he's the one that really uncovered this little juicy tidbit. But when September 11th happened and the planes hit the building and terror came from the sky and war came, exactly like the quatrain stated, people have to say, well, wow, he got the September right, but he got the year 1999 completely wrong. And I think what I really like about what John Hogue's interpretation is, because Nostradamus is always playing tricks on you, so you don't figure out what's actually going to happen until after the event. He doesn't want you to know about the event before it happens, because that will ruin the timeline. But he will tell you about the event after it happens, proving that he has efficacy and his powers of prediction are true. And what John Hogue proved is that you just have to take the numbers and invert them. So the nines become the 1999 is inverted, so that it reads backwards, and it becomes 2001. And so he actually does get the prediction right. It makes you have to work at getting it.
I remember Orson Welles predicting the quatrains of Nostradamus, and he said it like this: in the new land, by the way of the man-made mountains, the sun will cause to burn twice at 45 degrees, and not one inhabitant would remain. And that always stuck in my mind. And I used to tell people when I lived in the States in the 90s, this prediction, and everyone would laugh, obviously, but at some point it came true, because 45 degrees latitude is Manhattan.
That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah, he got a lot right. He got Hitler right. He got Napoleon right. He got a lot right, but he had to worry about a lot of things. The Inquisition was just a little bit behind him, and could have grabbed him at any stage of his life. And so it's just more proof that there is these people with these abilities. I think it's really important to realize that, because all of us have these abilities. And we can't let, powers that be shut down our abilities.
That's something
I
absolutely want to get into after we get into our next hour with our more questions too, with the abilities, how we all have them, how we could unlock them. We got a break in about 5 minutes, but I do have one more question that actually relates to when we were talking about the cross of Henday. This comes from Bill Williams from Sacramento, California. Why would such crucial information be placed in such a remote area such as the Cross of Henday?
Good question. Because actually, when it was put there in early 1600s, Henday was actually not a remote place at all. What had happened is that the Spain was the last country in Europe that still had some Islamic and alchemical influence. And so there were still teachers in Spain, all the way up until 1650 or so, that were teaching the arcane arts of astrology and alchemy. And so, in the repressed Europe, where up until the Renaissance you couldn't even read or write, the church wouldn't let you, people swarmed into Spain. And the thing is that there was only one easy way to walk. Remember, they didn't have cars. Walk to Spain from Europe, and that you didn't want to really go over the Pyrenees Mountains. So you went down the coast, and you had to go through Henday. Henday being the last town in France before you crossed over the border. And so the cross was put there in that town, and for another reason, in that Henday is a play on words, because both in Old English and in French, the H is always silent at the beginning of a word. That's why the British don't say Henry, they say Henry. They don't say herb, they say herb. And in Henday, it would be end day. So it's a cross about the end day. And the person that put it there because they understood the pun.
Of the fact that it would be the end of days.
That's right, which is what the cross is all about.
Now we got just a couple more minutes before we hit our next our break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to get some more listener questions and go into some more topics. But briefly, I wanted to ask you, what got you started on your path to start digging into ancient societies and looking between the lines of information that we all should have access to, but yet is hidden by an elite group or whatever you want to call it? Cabal could be another word.
Yeah, it was a couple of events that happened real close to each other. In 1986, I had a tremendously powerful shamanic experience in which I was shown a world that I'd never realized existed, and kind of set me out on a path. And then later that same year, I found a book called Mysteries of the Cathedrals by this guy named Fulcanelli, which had a chapter on the Cross of Henday in the book, which got me started on my path. And so it was a kind of a coincidence of events that went and transformed me from one person to another person, I guess you might say.
Well, you've done a fascinating job, and that's why we were all super excited that you are here. You are a legend. Like I said, you've produced several, you've been on so many different programs. In fact, you were part of Decoded with Brad Meltzer, right?
Oh, yeah.
What topic was that on?
Georgia Guidestones.
Now, can you briefly tell us before we go to break about the two documentaries you made, I believe the Nostradamus 2012 and then Time Wave 2013?
Yeah, Nostradamus 2012 was a show I produced for the History Channel. It was a really highly rated show when it aired, almost beat out Sunday Night Football, and which is, believe me, really a big thing. And it was about the lost book of Nostradamus, and which is a book purported to be written, but I don't believe it was. I believe it was written by a student of his and drawn by a student of his, which predicts the same things that the Cross of Henday predicts. And since Nostradamus is somewhat concurrent his life with the construction of the Cross of Henday, which really wasn't all that far from where he lived, you wonder if they weren't all involved in some kind of secret society working together to pass on a major secret to us, which is about this time when the sun finally decides to emit gigantic coronal mass ejections, which will happen, by the way. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that's kind of what got me going. And, when I first came out with my books, I was warning everybody that, there was a possibility of these coronal mass ejections happening, and NASA was laughing at me and calling me names and calling me a fearmonger. And then about 4 years after my book came out, my first book, they started saying the same thing that I was saying, and I know that they knew what I knew because I asked people in NASA and they told me, oh yeah. And so I think fortunately somehow we're breaking loose this idea, and NASA knows it, that we do not live on a stable star. We live on a highly variable star, and I mean highly variable. And you can't almost blame anything on humans because the sun is so unstable that any change in weather has to be due to the sun.
And thankfully, there's a lot of people talking about it. More and more people are growing aware, and thankfully there have been NASA employees who have come forward who have been a part of the conspiracy. With that being said, everybody, hang tight. We'll have so much more with Jay Weidner, including more questions from you, the listeners, when we return in just a brief 3 minutes. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
This is Travis Walton, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
Welcome back to Hour 2 of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J, and like we said, co-hosting with me live in London is my good friend Johnny Webb, where it happens to be 4 a.m. in London, UK. Real quick before we return to our guest, if you have any questions, by all means, keep sending them through Twitter or chat, or you can actually call 818-923-1713. Again, 818-923-1713. If you call, please keep your radio off in the background or muted and stay quiet until we call your area code. If you don't want to call, just continue to send us the questions as you have been. Real quick, just join us this Thursday for more on Richard Dolan, and he too will be taking your calls. A week from tonight, you will be hearing about an astonishing mansion that has hauntings going back to 400 years and so much more. Also, we do take guest requests. Go to drjradiolive.com. Use the contact section, which you have been using already, to send us UFO footage, UFO stories, and anything you want us to tell. But that's exactly where you could request who you want, and we take them very, very seriously. With that being said, I would like to turn over to our guest and ask him where people can find him. Mr. Weidner, let's go ahead and tell everyone where they can find your films, your books, how they can contact you.
Yeah, my films are at sacredmysteries.com. It's sacredmysteries.com. And my articles are Jay Weidner, JAYWEID, as in David, N as in Nancy, ER.com, and that's all for free. And so that's how you can find me. You can get contact at jweidner.com, and I try to answer all my emails.
And this is a living legend, 36, almost 30 years, 29 years to be exact, where you had your changing point, where you started your work. Am I right?
Yep.
That's
exactly.
Right. That is why you are a true legend. We do have two written questions that have just recently come. This one is from Philip Burns in Helena, Montana. Could you please briefly summarize why this I can't understand this word.
Fulcanelli.
There we go. Is so important as distinct from another notable?
Well, because first off, the book that he wrote is so incredibly dense and intelligent that it's mind-blowing. It's one of the rarest examples of a pure understanding of a reality that you'll ever see or read. And secondly, the fact that he is not telling us his real name. And I find that really intriguing, because most people would want to, dance their ego in front of everybody because they were so smart. And this guy chose to actually hide who he really was. In fact, we still don't know who he was. I believe now that he was not a single person, but a committee of very, very intelligent, enlightened beings who are trying to impart a wisdom to the human race to help us, and I'm trying to help them spread that message.
Now, here is another question from here in California, actually. Alice Lindsay from Alhambra, California. I remember buying Gaian exercise products years ago. How is the company doing today?
Well, I don't, the company's doing pretty good. I'm actually running one of the channels on GaiamTV.com, which is their new online alternative service, which I have shows, producing shows with David Wilcock and Regina Meredith and George Norrie and a lot of others, and trying to raise consciousness through producing this kind of programming. And we're doing very well. And I can't speak for Gaiam. Their stock seems to be doing well. But Gaiam TV, the company I work for, which is a little bit of a separate company, is really, we're not making money, but we're closing in on starting to make money. And that's a big thing, because in the world of streaming television, it's a tough competitive business, I'll tell you. But you guys, for 99 cents, you can join Gaiam TV for a month. It's GaiamTV.com, GAIAM as in mother, TV.com. and you can join for 99 cents and watch, hundreds of episodes of wisdom teachings with David Wilcock, and his new show Disclosure, Beyond Belief with George Norrie, and Regina Meredith is just the greatest interviewer of all time, and a lot of other movies and exercise, and it's 99 cents. Try it for a month. You can't lose,
I'm glad you brought up consciousness and awakening. We speak in words, 2 dimensions, right? But yet our thoughts, our feelings are all 3 dimensions. And it's a known fact we use a very small portion of our brain. Before Dr. Roger Lear passed away, he gave me a very interesting theory about the Tower of Babel. He thought or believed that prior to the Tower of Babel incident, we all had telepathy, the ability to read each other's minds and share each other's thoughts and feelings. But something happened where that power was taken away from us. And that's why when the Bible spoke of us speaking in tongues and no one could understand each other, was because that was the first time we were actually verbalizing what we were trying to communicate. Do you believe that we are all capable of having telepathy, telekinesis, and other things, things that are similar to what was in that famous sci-fi movie Lucy? Or do you think that it's just something that some people have extra abilities that that they can enhance versus what the normal population can do?
I think what happened is that through, I don't want to say the enslavement, but just because the human race, most of us just had to, work hard to get by for the last few thousand years, that we let, the hard work and digging and growing crops and everything, I think we just kind of let our psychic ability atrophy. I think it's all still there. It's just waiting to be awakened. And I think everybody is psychic. I'm sure of it. And I think a lot of people will have a psychic experience or a synchronicity, and they will just, put it away and say, oh, well, that was weird. What a weird coincidence. But that's actually not the reaction you should have. What you should have is a reaction of, oh, wait a minute, there's something going on here. There's something trying to send a message to me, and, I've got to pay attention. And that's what I think, and so it doesn't surprise me that there are like movements of kind of psychic energy that you can really watch us on the internet, where memes, as they call them, will sweep across the internet, and for some reason, some unknown reason, something becomes really, really famous and then fades away after a month or so. And it's because it attracted a certain kind of psychic vibe that we all have, but again, we've let it atrophy. And I like about a lot of the movies and TV shows that are coming out is they're like encouraging us to get back in touch with that kind of our own powers. And I think once we discover and rediscover our own powers, and I think that's what the word research comes from, because you're doing it again. And we will then discover who we really are, and then the powers that be are going to be very worried, because we're going to realize who's who and what's what, and we're going to take action.
I believe that same thing, that we all inherently have that power. And as you've seen throughout history, there are certain people who have seemed to have been visionaries, thinking outside the box, were given information that you couldn't normally find. And people ranging back to Leonardo da Vinci, Nikola Tesla, Buckminster Fuller, Arthur C. Clarke. I even put Nassim Haramein in this category. What do you think? And before I ask this question, you brought up an incident where Tesla, when he was hit by his Tesla coil for those 2 seconds, he essentially could see anything, was sort of enhanced. What do you think we can do ourselves to essentially enhance our abilities and make that sixth sense that we purport to actually be our first sense?
Well, I mean, it's really important that people understand what the power of your endocrine system, especially your pineal gland, and you should know that your pineal gland and it has two different. It has many different, but it has two main chemicals that it is in control of. And since the pineal gland sits at the very top of the endocrine gland system in the human body, which is very closely related to the chakra system, you can see that whatever action takes place at the top is going to, by gravity, work its way down through the rest of the system. So whatever occurs in the pineal gland is going to have a reverberatory factor on the glands that are underneath it, pituitary and all the rest. And so that makes the pineal gland a very important gland to examine if you want to understand the human body and health and all that. And you look at the two chemicals that get released by the pineal gland, and you discover some very serious and important factors. One is that when there's no light hitting your eyes, your pineal gland, which is really a third eye buried in the center of your brain, when that pineal gland is not receiving light through your eyes, it releases a chemical called melatonin. Excuse me. And when light is hitting your eyes, when you wake up in the morning and while you're awake all day, that receptor in the brain, the pineal gland, releases serotonin. And so what we discover through the years is that melatonin is the controller of the aging process. If you have a lot of melatonin in you, you tend to age less. You tend to not get wrinkled as fast. And serotonin, we've discovered, is only one atom away from being the same as dimethyltryptamine, which is the psychoactive ingredient in ayahuasca and DMT. And what it is almost like a gateway, a shamanic gateway into the world of gnosis. And so here we have in the pineal gland, which Descartes called the center of the soul, we have a gland which emits gnosis through the serotonin and extends your life through melatonin. So I think I can safely say that the mysteries of the pineal gland, once understood, are going to be equal to the mysteries of alchemy and the secrets of alchemy. And they're all related. And, I could go on for hours about this mystery because it's so fascinating. But the pineal gland is just really one of the most amazing subjects in the entire universe.
Some people actually label it as our spiritual antenna. And you're right. The awareness right now that's been created about the pineal gland is really exploded over the last decade, because you didn't really hear much about it in the 70s, 80s, or 90s per se. And so I'm really glad people are picking up on this. I don't mean to change topic, but we've got two more written questions. I guess they like to write today. This one is actually literally from my hometown. This is Maxine Pisano. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Maxine out there from Northridge, California. I'm going to read this directly. Was ancient Egypt and Atlantis in contact with each other? And if so, what did it mean for them to communicate?
Well, I think actually what it's more like what happened is that there was this worldwide, or at least semi-worldwide, geopolitical culture called Atlantis that had this kind of a different kind of technology, not the hardwired technology we have, but this resonant frequency technology, and they were good sailors and all that. And a terrible catastrophe happened. Probably there was a comet strike 13,000 years ago, and at least this is the narrative I'm agreeing with at the moment. And Atlantis was destroyed. So what happened was this comet struck 13,000 years ago, and it was a nasty strike. It was a gigantic comet, and it broke up into many pieces, and so much dust and dirt and water was thrown up in the air that it created not a mini ice age, one of the worst ice ages in Earth history, which is called the Younger Dryas. And that lasted about 1,300 years, in which the world was thrown into the worst freeze ever, because the comet strike kind of created a nuclear winter of so much dust in the air the sunlight couldn't get through. And finally, the Younger Dryas ended for some reason. I believe it ended with a coronal mass ejection, just kind of blew the ice away and created a huge melting situation in which gigantic flooding came, and the seas rose 300 feet. All this is verified in all the science. And I believe that what happened is that the remnant population of Atlantis, realizing that all of their knowledge and science was about to be lost forever, decided to build a series of monuments commemorating not just their culture and their knowledge, but also the event itself, the comet strike itself, which caused the end of their culture. And I believe they built the pyramids at Giza, about 9,300 years ago, after the Younger Dryas ended, and the Earth came back to a more normal temperature and the floods ended. And they picked Giza because of its location, and they built the Sphinx because it commemorated the constellation of Leo, which is when the catastrophe occurred. And they left probably a Hall of Records, as Edgar Casey has predicted, somewhere around the Sphinx, with the knowledge of everything that Atlantis knew. So I think Egypt is not so much part of Atlantis as much as a later reflection of the Atlantean culture.
I'm glad you brought up the meteor strike 13,000 years ago. And the reason why I say that is 13,000 years seems to be told by many researchers. In fact, Jason Martell recently talked about that, it being a cycle. I've even heard David Wilcock mention it, that 13,000 years there seems to be something recurring all the time. Do you believe that that's the cycle that we're in right now, that we're due for a meteor strike or something along the lines of that?
Well, there certainly have been a lot of fireballs in the last few years, haven't there?
Yes.
I mean, I've been around quite a while, and I guarantee you there were not any. If you had one fireball in 5 years, that would have been amazing. Now you're getting a fireball every 3 months or less. So there's something going on. We're moving into some kind of active phase. There's no doubt. I think, this goes back to Alternative 3. These guys know about it. You have to ask yourself, well, what are the elites going to do if they're the ones who are, that are behind the secret societies building these monuments, warning about this thing that's happening, and then the fireballs come, and I don't know.
This almost is what I just asked, but it just came in this minute. It says monuments. Jay's talking about the Cross of Henday. Ask him about this. Does it have anything to do with the 13,000 years?
How the Cross of Henday has to do with it?
Yeah, that's the question that was written in those words.
Well, yeah, so on the Cross of Henday, there's a bunch of symbols. And one of the symbols is 4 A's, but the crossbar on the A's is not straight, as an A is. It's crooked, looking very much like a Masonic symbol of the compass and the I'm going to forget what the other thing is at the moment. But anyway, it looks just like them. And then there's an oval around it, and then there's a cross, and the A's are in each of the quadrants. And so that circle is the 4 ages of the yugas, and the oval is the circling of time. And so this Cross of Henday is telling us that time is not linear, time is cyclical, and that things repeat themselves. And so you go across and around, you can see this in my film, The Secrets of Alchemy, or my book, Mysteries of the Great Cross of Henday. And if you go around the cross, or if you just actually move to the left of the oval with the 4 A's, you'll see the angry sun face with 4 kind of balls with 6 extensions coming out of them surrounding the sun. And my contention is that the 4 balls that are surrounding the angry sun are the comets. The comet came in and it broke into 4 pieces. It was the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and just beat the hell out of the planet, essentially. It was a very big comet. And we know this from nanodiamond discoveries that are going on and new ways of discovering off-planet elements we can find and actually date all of this. In fact, Graham Hancock's new book is going to be all about this, confirming what's on the Cross of Henday, even though he probably won't mention the Cross of Henday. But nevertheless, his findings will confirm what's on the Cross of Henday. And then Robert Schoch's newest book, forget the name of it now, Mysterious. Anyway, he's the guy that uncovered the dating on the Sphinx and proved that the Sphinx was much older than the previous geologists had said because of watering. He worked with John Anthony West. His newest book says that the Younger Dryas ended when a coronal mass ejection occurred. And you'll look also on the sun part of the Cross of Henday, and you'll see the angry sun, which is a coronal mass ejection, albeit primitively portrayed by the artist. But hey, working in 1600, that's pretty good.
I'd like to bring you back up to the modern times and talk about room 237. Can you give us some details on that?
Well, I came out with my second Stanley Kubrick essay, and then I put it in also my film Kubrick's Odyssey, the first film, Kubrick and Apollo, which the first part is about the front screen projection work that I just described to you, but the second part was a breakdown of the movie The Shining, and it really just caused a shockwave across not just the conspiracy world and the Apollo world, but also the cinema world. People in Hollywood were like aghast at what I was saying, and it was very difficult to argue with me. And so then Rodney Asher, who's a very enterprising filmmaker, an editor, and a teacher, he saw my film, and he told me it's what inspired him to look at all of the interpretations of The Shining and that were around, that were interesting. And he compiled all of them, kind of using me and my theories as the main kind of thread throughout the film. And what's interesting is that the other theories that he chose to kind of bookend with mine were in some ways proof that my theory about The Shining was right. So one of the theories stated that it was about the slaughter of the American Indians. And I agree. The Overlook Hotel in The Shining was built on an Indian graveyard, and it's supposed to represent America. So that one agreed with me. Another theory that was on there said that it was about the Holocaust and it was about the Germans. And again, I agree, because the Germans were all involved in the NASA space program, and he was trying to get that in. So it was weird how all these other theories on the movie The Shining seem to echo my theory, which is that Stanley Kubrick directed the moon landings and then faked the making of the Stephen King novel so that he could tell his own story in a very secretive way of what he went through making the movie, making the Apollo moon landings. So, Jack Nicholson plays Stanley Kubrick, and he's writing a novel. He's making a movie, in other words. But he really he doesn't want his wife to know what this novel is about. Just like Stanley didn't want his family to know about this secret mission, the secret movie that he was making.
There's a spoof movie that's out at the moment that, it's even got Donald Rumsfeld and I think a few of the other, sort of 70s, 80s type politicians in it.
Oh, I know what you're
They're all talking
about, the
about
Dark
Stanley
Side of the
Kubrick's
Moon.
movie and how they're keeping it secret and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, but there's an interview with Stanley Kubrick's wife, and I wondered, have you ever interviewed his wife or calibrated with her anything?
Well, I have through a third-party source, and she apparently would like to talk to me. I have to get to England, which I may be getting to in October, and I may actually come talk to her. I definitely bring him a camera, but yeah, that movie you're talking about is Dark Side of the Moon, and it came out like I don't know when, like before Stanley died, I believe, but it has this no, it was after Stanley died, and it has this fascinating interview with Christiane Kubrick by this French news crew, in which she is intimating that NASA owed Stanley something, and that's why they gave him the lenses, the $2 million lenses that he used to shoot Barry Lyndon. We know that that's true. NASA did give him the lenses that he used to shoot Barry Lyndon, and she's got this smirking look like she knows this secret. And so I believe that movie is actually was created by some intelligence agency who realized that this French crew interviewed Mrs. Kubrick and got a little too much out of her, and so then they threw the whole story with Rumsfeld and Nixon and Kissinger using, extant film clips, which were easy to get, and just kind of edited them so it looked like they were possibly talking about the moon landings being fake, to get ahead of anybody who ever discovered the truth, right? Because then they could bring out this false film and say, see, this film is a bunch of BS, and you're just like that film.
There's another film on the same level, which is called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. Are you familiar with this?
Oh, yeah. That's a great movie.
I got a couple.
Sorry, John. Back to you.
I got two listener questions. Some of them are going back a little bit since we came back from break. One of them is pretty general. I know the answer to this, but I was hoping from a professional standpoint, you can explain to this listener. Forgive me if I pronounce this name incorrectly, but I believe it's Yana Banyanova, possibly Russian, from New York, New York. Could you please define what you mean by alchemy?
Yeah. Alchemy is like a holistic view of nature, whereas science is the art of breaking things apart to understand them. So science kind of peers down into nature, tries to find, the pieces that are put together to create a whole. Whereas alchemy is kind of exact opposite. It looks up into the whole and tries to find the things that unite nature. And so it looks for similes and things that are similar to each other in nature, and realize that there's this gigantic correspondence that goes on between all things that are alive. And so science is a practice of taking something and doing it over and over. And if the same occurrence happens every time you do it over and over, then it's true, and this is science. For alchemy is not about the thing that happens the same way over and over. Alchemy is about the singularity. It's about that thing that only happens once every 10,000 times that you try something. It's a correspondence of both the time and the space that you're doing the experiment, and so you get things like Pons and Fleischmann's experiments in cold fusion back in 25 years ago, and sometimes the cold fusion experiments would work, and sometimes they wouldn't, and so Pons and Fleischmann were completely disgraced. But actually, they had really discovered more of an alchemical reaction where more energy is produced than is put in, but it depends on your space and your time. And so, you might do the experiment in New York and it fails, but you do it up on Pikes Peak and it works. And what's the difference? Well, there's many factors at work here. The universe is a much bigger place than we think. We're only seeing a very small, finite amount of light waves with our eyes. We're only hearing a small, finite amount of sound waves with our ears. That doesn't mean that there isn't other light waves and sound waves and all sorts of other waves. It just means that we can only perceive a few of them. So there's a huge amount of nature that we can't see and can never be aware of, and that's the part that alchemy is interested in.
It's funny because, like in Indonesia, they say that if you do your washing on a full moon night, you don't really have to do much scrubbing because the water seems to react to the clove and the dirt, and it just falls out. Is this sort of on that sort of lines?
That's exactly right. So on a full moon, what happens is that there's a huge amount of gravity doing the person's work for them, and pulling the water up, just like on a full moon night, the sap and the water in oak trees and elm trees and any kind of tree is pulled up into the tree. So on a full moon, the tree is full of water, and the Native Americans knew that, and they knew that you could tap, say, an oak tree on a full moon night, and say out in the desert, and you'd get a gush of water because the gravity of the moon is pulling up the water. And alchemists work with that kind of energy, and it's real true, because if you understand the way that nature works, you don't have to work as hard. So you wash your clothes on a full moon night, and you just leave it in the bucket, and the gravity will jerk the water around, and just like it does in a washer, and kind of you're in a slower motion, not in a fast motion, but a very slow motion. So you leave it in a bucket for 8 hours, and then you just pull it out, and it's all clean. Whereas on a new moon, it wouldn't work.
We have about 20 minutes left of the show, and I want to get all the listener questions and as much information as we can. So I'm going to curb my question in favor of some of these listener questions. I'm going to go in reverse order. This first one, or the most recent one, is from Al Page from Lansing, Michigan. Why do they call it Hermetic occultism, and what are other types of occultism?
Well, it's Hermetic because it's based on the works of Hermes Trismegistus, who is otherwise known as Thoth, the greatest scientist that came from Egypt and designed the pyramids and all the other things. And he left behind a book called the Emerald Tablet, which is really the secrets of alchemy in kind of a more poetic way of discussing what I just told you. And so Hermetic, or also is hermit. The word hermit comes from Hermetic because to really practice alchemy in the right way, you almost have to be a hermit. And hermits also in Europe were these interesting guys that were sort of like sadhus in India. And they weren't very clean, and because they lived out in the woods, but they were somehow very attractive, and they would come into towns and they would change the nature of the negative energies that were in villages without claiming credit on it. It was it's part of the Hermetic tradition, is to lower the hot vibes in the places where you are living or walking through, to kind of lower the anger and the terror and the fear, and change the attitudes of the people by doing certain kinds of practices. And this is in one of the missions of the alchemist, is to do that. And because the powers that be use fear, and fear is a business model to scare the living daylights out of us on a daily basis, and there's really nothing to fear, not really.
And like we said earlier in the beginning of the show, fear is control. Going back to alchemy, a lot of people, when in the same sentence with alchemy, they use the word gold as if they try to create gold using other metals. Do you know much about that?
Oh yeah, gold is part of it's part of this it's it goes back to electromagnetism. What gold is gold is a perfectly conductive metal. In other words, if you had a wire made of gold as opposed to copper, and you put a charge, say 100 volts, on one end of the wire, at the other end of the wire, say 10 miles away of your gold wire, very expensive wire, by the way,
Yes.
you would still get your 100 volts, or nearly your 100 volts. There'd be very little loss of energy. Whereas if you put a copper wire and do the same thing, you lose a few volts along the way. It's called resistance. It's built into the metal itself. So gold is this kind of perfectly conductive metal. And so when you understand that, and then you also understand that the human body is actually more of an electric body than it is a physical body, that you're not really living off of calories as much as you're living off of voltage. I know it sounds odd, but believe me, I can track you in 10 different directions to prove I'm right. And you can actually go without food if you have voltage. And you get voltage, by the way, from sunlight on your eyes, seafood gives you hormones, and that will increase your body's electric voltage. And so when you see that, you realize that you can raise your inner voltage in your body to the point where you can create stargates and even reverse aging and all sorts of things. And it all has to do with the pineal gland, the toroidal body around the human being, the spinal system and the chakras and the endocrine system. And together they work together. And if you're in harmony with those particular things, then you will be in really good health.
I'm glad you brought up the fact of gold being 100% conductivity, because that's a science fact. No one can dispute that. And that is
Right.
why it's so much in demand now. Do you believe that's why it was in demand in the ancient times, because they had electricity? Or was there an ulterior motive of why they were gold was in such high demand over the last several thousand years up until our modern age?
It's still in high demand. I think it's just that they had it has a quality that us plebes don't know about, but the alchemists know about it, and I think the elites know about it. And again, I think it has to do with its ability to superconduct the electric body, and maybe somehow they're creating it. Maybe it's monatomic gold. I don't know. At this point, I'm still in the middle of trying to make up my mind about all of this, but it's some kind of process where they're either refining the gold or somehow being able to process it, possibly growing it into food and things so they can eat it, and then getting that superconductive charge out of it to liven up their electric body, which is really the key to health.
This is a question going earlier. Okay, I'm going to read it. This is from Ron Murphy from Enola, Pennsylvania. Do you have a photograph of the Notre Dame wall on a website online somewhere that we can view?
Which wall?
I don't know. This is exactly what it was written. I'm assuming it had something to do with some ancient communication. I don't know, Ron. If you're out there listening, that you sent the question, please rephrase that, and I'll be more than happy to ask it in a better way. Yeah, Ron Murphy from Pennsylvania. I'm going to ask you this: you've been doing this for 30 years, and you've uncovered a lot of conspiracies, and of course, delved into so many different areas. What would you say are the top conspiracies that stick out in your head or bother you the most, that you believe that all of us and all humanity should have access to, the information should not be withheld from?
Oh, probably several things. One would be the knowledge that we are extremely powerful beings, and we just don't know it. And then two would be free energy, I know that it exists. I know it's real. I think it's a crying shame that we're using these primordial energies, which are like Fukushima and automobile, petrol burning things. I just can't believe it when we can have boxes that run our entire house for free. And I think and then third, if I could do anything, it'd probably be to stop the extinction of a lot of the animal species, especially in Africa. And again, that's again due to free energy, desperate people who can't power or even cook their own food. And again, if they had free energy, they wouldn't need to go poach animals. And so it really irritates me that they keep this stuff locked up when if it was released, a lot of the environmental problems would start going away. And even we wouldn't have to work as hard because we wouldn't have to pay for heating our houses and energy and gas, and which is a huge part of everything that we're doing and paying for. And so these are the things that kind of really irritate me, and I wish that we could break these things free from the stranglehold that they have on it.
Well, fortunately, we are by using alternative means like this to get the information directly to the people. We do have a question from London. Go ahead, Johnny. Ask it.
Hi there, that's George from London, and he's asking, do you think there's an Archon connection with the Sandy Hook parents and the recent church shooting family member parents?
I have not investigated the South Carolina incident, so I'm not going to comment. I've gotten in too much trouble commenting on something too soon. I hope and pray that this is not a hoax, because if it is, it has got to be, the worst way to hoax something ever, outside of what happened at Sandy Hook, which I do believe was a hoax. Archon connection, well, there's certainly a kind of a connection to a false reality being woven at Sandy Hook, and also in the Boston bombings and a lot of other incidences recently, and that is a fingerprint of the Archons. So and again, what would be the point would be, again, to take negative energies and use it as food. All these people, crying and screaming about those poor children, and it's still to this day feeling terrible about it, and which is, just part of their humanity, and I feel, really actually good about people who grieve for the children like that. But is the event itself real? I know the grief's real, and I know the Archons are feeding off that grief, but is the event real? And that's the question we have to examine. And this is what they're hiding. So if they begin hiding things in South Carolina, then I'm going to get worried. It wouldn't surprise me, though.
We got a little bit about 10 minutes left for the end of the show, and I want to get as much information in. I want to ask you about Sandy Hook and the Boston Marathon. But before I do, real quick, let me just go ahead and ask you this other listener question. This is from Jim Guerrero in Houston, Texas. How close are the future predictions of the Great Cross and those of Nostradamus?
Well, again, like I said earlier, have you ever seen so many meteors and fireballs going around? And I mean, and I think, we're moving into like some kind of zone in the orbital pattern of the solar system, which takes us into a period where, stuff starts flying around us, and sometimes we get hit and sometimes we don't. And we're starting to get a lot of activity over the last 3 years or so, maybe 4 years, and I think that's not a coincidence.
George from London's got another question. Go ahead, Johnny. Ask it. Johnny, you still with us?
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, George is asking, what, and it was similar to what we're just talking about there, which is what do you think of these trumpet sounds that's going on all around the world lately?
I don't know. I can't tell if it's an internet hoax or if it's real. If it's real, then it could be a number of things. It could be, well, let's put it this way. There could be a relationship There is a relationship between the magnetic field of the Earth and the magnetic field of the sun. We sit inside the magnetic field of the sun, and if these, we know the sunspots and the coronal mass ejections are directly related to the electromagnetism of the sun. So it could be that as the sun changes, it's causing a resonant frequency shift on the Earth's electromagnetic field, which is having an effect on the actual surface of the Earth, causing it to expand, which I think is happening right now, which accounts for a lot of the gigantic holes that are appearing in Russia and Louisiana and all over the place. I think this might be the beginning of a minor Earth expansion event. And so in that case, those sounds could be, the separating of land masses causing groaning and strange sounds and that kind of thing.
Go ahead, Johnny. You had a question.
Yeah, oh God, it's gone actually, but it was off the top of my head, but it's gone. Excuse me. But
About
I'm
the
sure
harp.
back.
You were
That's
asking
right.
about the harp.
Yeah, recently there was a famous UFO channel that makes HD videos, and they were posting a video of a big sort of bolt of lightning that was sort of fixed. It wouldn't sort of flash and disappear; it just stayed there, buzzing in these clouds, and it was sort of warping in and out of these clouds. And as it hit clouds, the clouds would literally shift. And I wondered if it was HARP or whether this is an ARCHON thing. I wonder if you'd seen that footage yourself.
No, and I want to see it. That sounds awesome. I don't know what that is. I know that it could be the electric universe, some kind of field pattern with electricity. It could be, they're not even using HARP. HARP is shut down, I think. They've gone beyond HARP. They're using some kind of probably orbital equipment now, and who knows what they've got at this point. HARP is looking like third grade Boy Scout stuff compared to what they've got now. So
You're
this
absolutely
could be a weapons
right.
test.
Generally, what we know about is usually outdated. In this.
Oh yeah.
We have a little over about 7 minutes left, and I want to ask you briefly about Sandy Hook and Boston bombing. A lot of people say the reason why false flags such as those are occurring and that they're not genuine are so they can take away our rights. Each time something happens, one more of our rights are taken away. For instance, the Patriot Act comes along, and all of a sudden you have surveillance without warrants that are just so much easier to get. Now people are lobbying to take away the Second Amendment, and they're blaming the school shootings and things like that. What do you think that has anything to do with Sandy Hook, or what's your take on Sandy Hook in general?
Well, actually, I think that what happened is that after 9/11 and the victims came forth and demanded that there be an investigation, they realized that it was just a lot easier from now on to not have any victims' families asking for investigations. It was just a pain in the ass. And so they decided that they were not going to have victims anymore. Not real victims, not victims that would actually really ask for an investigation, not victims that would really ask for hearings, not victims that would actually look into the entire incident with a fine-tooth comb, as you would if you lost a loved one. And I think that's what happened. I think that's the continuous thing. I hope, I don't know how to say this, because I say, I hope the incident in South Carolina was real, but then that would mean that 9 people died. So I can't say that I hope it was real. I actually hope it was fake, because that means 9 people didn't die. So, I'm kind of caught in a quandary here of which way to go with this. And so, I'm going to look into South Carolina, and I will examine it. I've examined other incidences lately, and there are questionable things going on here, and we have to examine these things and not just take the media's word as to what's going on, because they are lying to us. And if they'll lie to us once, they'll lie to us about Sandy Hook, they'll lie to us about anything. And and I beg people who think I'm crazy about Sandy Hook to look into it. Look into the 10,000-page report that's got 950 pages redacted completely. Why were they redacting this? It's a school shooting, there's lots of other questionable things going on at Sandy Hook, which I could go on and on about. But I think you should do your own work and not listen to me.
And in general, with humanity, especially with the bigger countries, the mainstream media, the information they give us, like you said, is false or is partial, is never the full truth that we're supposed to get. And of course, the news, when you watch the news, it's all about the bad stuff that happened. You turn on the news and hear the prime time, 6 o'clock news talking about the best things that happened of the day. You talked about the worst things that happens of the day, which creates fear. I'm going to go back to the free energy. That is a huge notion that's been talked about for a long time, and there's a lot of people that have claimed to have created these devices. As a matter of fact, Dr. Greer has what's called the STAR Challenge, which anybody who can present him an actual free energy device will be awarded $100,000. Do you know of any people that are currently working on any such devices?
Oh yeah, lots of people, and I'm encouraged them, and thank Dr. Greer for what he's doing. I really appreciate it. But I think what we have to realize with these free energy devices is that the opposition to what they are is so huge and so deep that we're going to have to just kind of, just kind of swallow it and take it and release the plans for your energy devices free on the internet. I know you're not going to make any money. Maybe you can start a online money gathering campaign to get money for your device. But I think we're just going to have to take that attitude from here on. Is that we're just going to have to release things for free and hope for the best, because patents and all that are never going to work here because they're going to stop us at every turn.
You're absolutely right. Over 5,000 patents have been stolen, essentially, for national security reasons. How pathetic is that? Somebody spends their time, their education, their skills, create something that's fantastic that can help humanity, and yet all of a sudden it is locked away with the key thrown away under the nuisance of national security. What kind of BS is that? It bothers me a lot.
It bothers me too, and they do it over and over. And what the patent office has become is an intel gathering device, so they can look at all the inventions that all these independent guys are doing, and then take them dark, and then tell the guy that we're not going to accept your patent.
And
they take it dark.
And that's sadly the way it's been. Not just the patent office, virtually everything, even Facebook and Google, and everyone sells. The
Smithsonian even is covering up ancient artifacts. Yeah.
I think George Orwell's 1984 was better off than we are today. Would you agree?
I think so. Absolutely. Yeah, I'd rather be in 1984 than 2015.
We have a couple minutes left, and I actually wanted to give you the floor. In a minute or so, what would you like to give the listeners a final message?
That I think that we're in for some not totally dire economic events, but I think we're in for a correction very soon here, and I think people should prepare themselves and do whatever they can. If you can grow food in your garden and dig a well or whatever, it might behoove you to do that soon here. And then secondly, my feature film, The Last Avatar, is opening very soon here, and will be out on Amazon and iTunes, and I think your audience will really, really like it.
And one more time, let's give your websites again.
Yeah, it's sacredmysteries.com for my DVDs. You can go there to look at the Last Avatar trailer. And then my free stuff is on Weidner, JAYWEIDNER.com, where you can read my wacky articles and research and all that.
I wouldn't per se call them wacky. That's why you are such a rock star among all these researchers. Again, Mr. Weidner, it has been a true honor. Everybody out there, this interview will be uploaded on YouTube. We've been a little slow, both from technical issues, and I'm sure if you guys have heard, I've had undergone surgery, which obviously I'm okay doing this program. But again, all the recent shows will be uploaded and with some nice eye candy for you to watch while you're listening to these shows. All you have to do is go to drjradiolive.com and hit the YouTube channel. Remember, that's the same name for every social media site. Dr. J Radio Live, DRJ Radio Live, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Flickr, Tumblr, YouTube, Google+, all of it. And with that being said, we'd like to thank all the listeners for honestly, you are the lifeline of this show. If it wasn't for you, we would not be doing this. Of course, we have to thank our all-star guest, Mr. Jay Weidner. Of course, my co-host live in London, who was awake at 5 a.m., Johnny Webb. All the people who have been asking questions, I truly appreciate it. Of course, the station owner, Keith Rowland, and the man himself, Art Bell, will be returning in 27 days. That's right, everybody. 27 days. Monday, July 20th, you will hear him here live on darkmatterdigitalnetwork.com. And remember, this Thursday, Richard Dolan. Next week, you'll also hear us with, of course, the Summer Wind Society. With that being said, this is Dr. J signing out.